Welcome back to day 2 of the watercolor series. Today we're going to learn how to paint some moons using a lot of the wet on wet technique, some layering, and then we're even going to introduce salt to make a fun texture for them. I always like to begin with sketching out my composition or my paintings, so I am going to start by doing this. You do not have to. I really want to do some crescent moons. So we'll start this. They're not going to be perfect, which is fun. No problem. This one's going to be a little bit more. Even fuller moon. And then the fullest moon. If you need help drawing the circles, go ahead and you can grab anything that's a circle at home, such as like a cup that you can trace, anything that can help give you that shape. I'll also be using my number 6 round brush, but any brush you have, go ahead, get it wet, and I'll be working mostly in the colors of blues. So I'll be using this ultramarine blue and indigo, even some turquoise, maybe some of the purples, and then I do have a Payne's Gray that I love. I recommend getting a Payne's Gray if you don't have one, but otherwise the blues will work great. Even mixing a little bit of red can help get that purple color if you need a purple. So begin by getting your brush really wet. I'm going to start with a really light wash of a blue color to fill my entire moon. So let's start with the crescent moon up here. So we're just going to do a nice light wash. Almost looks, it's very transparent. Doesn't have a lot of paint, mostly water. And now while this is still wet, we're going to use that wet on wet technique, and we're going to pick up a little bit of a darker, more paint on our brush to drop into the already wet moon. So go ahead and start adding some of that color. Going to use some more turquoise to get more dimension and fun colors in this moon. But seeing those blooms happen is what we want for the painting today. So continue to add layers. We're going to do this to each phase of the moon. The same technique to all the phases of the moon. Again, mostly water, very little paint to get started. So all I'm doing is picking up mostly water, and I have a little bit of paint left over on my brush just to get a nice wet surface. Now I'll pick up more blue and start dropping it in. Moons are textured, and so that's kind of what we're creating with the bloom technique. I can see I have a lot of water in here, which is okay. You won't get quite the texture if it's too wet. So again, if you don't have a darker gray color in your palette at home, I recommend that you just grab some red to mix with a blue that's going to create a really deep color, almost purpley blue. And that'll layer in there. So that's what I did here, is I created a mix of blue and red. And then I'll drop that in there. It would even be fun just to put in a pure red into your moon, seeing how that will dry. Now you want to leave some areas lighter. I know it's really tempting to want to keep dropping paint in there, but in order to create dimension in your moon, you really want to keep some lightness in that middle part because it is a round sphere. So this is a good time if you're wanting to learn the salt technique. You probably already know this from elementary and middle school, but all you need is a little salt, and go ahead and drop that on your painting, and then it's going to do a really fun technique. Let it dry, and then we'll wipe it off. You may want to graduate to a bigger brush for your last spoon because it is a lot of a bigger space. So again, leave the center mostly lighter, just applying a lot of water, a little bit of blue. And really try and get your crisp edge. I know it's hard to do freehand, that's why I guess I do recommend grabbing a cup or any bowl that you have at home that'll fit nicely on your paper to trace. Any area that you don't paint on, that will stay white for the most part. So give that a try too. So I'm not using the layering technique much within the moon painting. It's mostly about the letting the water and the paint mix to see a fun texture. I add more red. Because this is a cold press paper, it has more tooth to it. It's not going to dry as fast as it would on a hot press paper. So I'm adding a darker edge around the moon because, again, it's a sphere, and that's the way that the shadows work on a round object. And I'm even moving my paintbrush in different ways. That'll give you a little bit of a different looking blob of paint. Being really careful not to touch this one area, but I am going to add a few little dots to it. This might be a good one to wait, and we may want to go ahead and layer once it does dry. You'll get a darker color to apply. Right now, all the water is doing is spreading out the paint, and it's not letting it layer on top. So for example, if I wanted to go, this one's dry, so if I wanted to go back and add a really dark edge, I could. But we won't forget that our salt is still on there. But I don't want to wipe the salt off until the painting's truly dry, because I hate to smear anything else. So I'm just going to be a little patient here. I think right now would be a good time to drop in the salt on the last full moon. You want to do that before the paint is dry. So we'll let that dry a little bit. I'll go ahead and add a darker edge and wipe the salt off, and then your moons are almost done, and this will be a really fun piece to hang on your wall.